Hello and welcome to Leicester Fan TV for tonight's type of fan zone show as we used to do. Today's something a little bit different. We haven't got other Leicester fans on. We haven't got a West Ham fan on who we're playing on Sunday, but we have got a Leeds fan. Some of you will already know Oscar because he's definitely been on the channel before a few times. But yeah, Oscar from All Leeds TV is here and we're just going to be discussing really the relegation battle and what might happen this Sunday. So, Oscar, how are you, mate?
Yeah, well, coping, mate, coping, It's, I think that intro, by the way, to this show was probably the best thing I've seen this season for both teams, to be totally honest with you, mate.
Yes, mate, it's been a tough one. I mean, look, we'll get straight into it. The first thing I want to talk about really is Leeds. I remember being on a show with you and Joe at the start of the season, before the season even started, and you guys were hopeful. I mean, I got a bit of stick saying that I thought you were going to go down, and to be fair, Joe said he thought Leicester were going to go down, but it wasn't the worst of transfer windows for you, was it? Because you obviously lost Rafinha and Calvin Phillips, but you did bring in some players who you thought would keep you up.
Yeah. To be honest, yeah. Some of the signings have been relatively good. I mean, Tyler Adams, very good when he's played. Unfortunately, injury prone. Sinistera, similar story, being very good when he's played, but injury prone. Mark Rocker's had spells of looking decent, although there's a big split in the fan base about Mark Rocker. Max Berber came in January, good impact, but ultimately there's too many signings that haven't worked out for us. That looks good on paper, like Brendan Aronson, for example. Rasmus Christensen looked okay on paper, but they've been solid 4, 5 out of 10. To be honest, been pretty terrible. If I'm being totally honest, and yeah, there's been far too many of them. Obviously, Willie Nonto has been a big success story as well, but ultimately, I still stand by the fact. It's not a great squad of players. It isn't a great squad of players. It's not really. I don't particularly think it's a great squad of characters either. I don't really particularly. I'll be honest. Don't particularly like most of the players in that squad. Never mind not rating them as footballers. I just think character-wise, they're not right for Leeds United. If I'm being totally honest, that might be harsh, but I think most of it. You've got to look at Victor Orta. I think in terms of recruitment, he's targeted in the wrong areas in terms of what to improve. And the signings we have made in a lot of areas haven't fitted the system or the squad. Management-wise, I think Jesse Marsh, listen, my feelings on Jesse Marsh. He is probably one of the main reasons we are where we are. He was absolutely shockingly bad. Javi Gracia started well, ultimately wasn't really the answer. And Sam Allardyce has come in, said a lot of things, and really there's been a little bit of change, but not as much as what he'd make you believe. So it's just been, I can't put it down to one thing because you don't finish where we are going to finish in the table and it'd be down to one thing. It's just a combination of terribleness, really.
Yeah. I mean, I was going to touch on, obviously, Javi Gracia. I mean, he came in. It was overwhelming from the Leeds fans that you wanted. Marsh gone, obviously. Gracia, I mean, how much do you put on him? Obviously, I mean, it's always tough for any manager coming into a team down there in the table, especially late on. It wasn't that late for you guys, was it? But he came in and, like you said, he made a little bit of a different start with, but didn't really continue that. Do you put much on him? Much of the blame on how he handled things? I mean, I know that I've listened to you guys before talk about him and Nonto not being played. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I don't put that much on Gracia, really. I think ultimately, if you look at his points per game, it'd have been enough to stay up. It was over a point a game, and that really, this season, that gets you into the mid-table. But ultimately, it's such a small sample size. That 10 games, I've never known anything like it in terms of a manager go from being up here to down there in about the space of 3 or 4 games. It was crazy, really. If you ask Leeds fans about Javi Gracia after we beat Nottingham Forest at the start of April, I think most would have said, sign him on a 2-year contract now, kind of thing. Let's just get that done right here, right now. He is the answer. He took 10 points from his first 6 games, and there were 6 tough games as well, by the way. We had to play Arsenal, Wolves away, Chelsea away in that sort of first 6 games or so, and he took 10 points out of that. So, at the end of the day, I know it ended pretty terribly, and I think Gracia had to go in terms of the timing of the situation. I'm not going to put a lot of blame on Gracia, but ultimately he wasn't really the answer towards the end. As soon as things started to turn, the 5-1 defeat to Palace, the 6-1 against Liverpool, we never looked like recovering from that really, and it just seemed to be a case of heads just went at that point. And I think ultimately he had to go, and it's one of them with Gracia. I mean, he didn't do a great job. There's no getting around that. It was a pretty poor job he did overall, but he's nowhere near the main person to blame for our situation. He could have done better. He could have used Nonto more. He could have done this and that more. But ultimately, I'm not putting that much of the blame on Javi Gracia. When he got sacked, he did it with dignity. And yeah, the complete opposite of Jesse Marsh, to be honest, who, it was the complete opposite, really. He just kind of dragged on. It's still in the area, still putting tweets out in social media, and you're thinking, have you got no shame, the situation you put Leeds United into?
Yeah. I mean, we're gonna come back to Leeds shortly because we're gonna talk about this weekend's fixtures. But we'll move on to Leicester, Oscar, because it's always interesting. For me in particular, I'm sure it's the same with other Leicester fans, getting kind of an outsider's opinion on how you've seen Leicester's season this year. I mean, last year wasn't the best of seasons for Leicester either. We did somehow finish in the top half of the table, and obviously a semi-final in Rome for the Conference League. But for Leicester, it's gone from bad to worse this season. Again, like you said about Leeds, there's so many factors that that have come to play, that have led us to where we are now. One thing for a lot of Leicester fans, because it is easy to throw blame on the manager. Obviously, Brendan Rodgers. I mean, you've heard me before on other shows, Oscar, about, I think I said before the World Cup, if Rodgers isn't gone soon, we're going to be relegated. And to be fair, there was quite a few people who took the mick out of me for saying that. But how do you see it? Because I mean, Leeds are now linked with Brendan Rodgers for next season, even in the Championship, which I'm surprised about. Whether he dropped down there. How do you see it really? How do you see Leicester's season? How it's gone?
I mean, Leicester followed a similar trajectory to Leeds. I mean, between 2018 and 2021, like Leeds, you've just been on a constant upward trajectory under Brendan Rodgers, under Marcelo Bielsa for us. Obviously, we cut ties with Marcelo Bielsa far too early for me, and you guys probably stayed a little bit too long with Brendan Rodgers. And despite saying that about Brendan Rodgers, I am very happy to see him linked with Leeds United. I think the thing to say about Brendan Rodgers is what's happened to him at Leicester is no new thing. Saw it happen at Liverpool, after the first 2 seasons. Celtic, to a lesser extent, similar kind of things happened. It kind of dropped off that last kind of season. Swansea wasn't there long enough at, and it's not a new thing this with Brendan Rodgers, where his management style, perhaps after 2 years or so, it gets a little bit tiresome in terms of his style of management. Not necessarily style of play, but style of management probably gets a little bit tiring, especially as the players become higher and higher profile. Someone like Yuri Tillemans, when he first came to Leicester, was relatively unknown. I had heard of him, but I think most of us wouldn't have said, "Oh, that's someone who's well known in the football universe," kind of thing, of Yuri Tillemans. Similar to James Maddison. It's all well and good first 2 years when you build up and up and up with those players. They're getting better and better, but at the same time, they're attracting attention from the likes of Arsenal, Tottenham, Newcastle, Man United, etc., etc. Eventually, heads might start to turn. When you see the project maybe plateau a little bit, like it has for Leicester, it's hard to keep those players on board, and that's maybe to an extent what Brendan Rodgers has found. And I think another thing as well is Brendan Rodgers has never been particularly good in the transfer market. That's one of my big things about him coming to Leeds. He has to be under a sporting director and the head coach. He can't come in as manager. He can't build the squad on his own, because he's shown at Liverpool with the Suarez money, wasted pretty much every penny, if we're being totally honest. Celtic didn't really have to do too much for a rebuild. He left before the rebuild kind of came about. Leicester again, Vestergaard, Bertrand, wrong type of players for what Leicester probably needed at the time. I mean, John Rudkin.
Yes. Yeah.
Is he head of recruitment or?
Yeah, he's director of football. Yes. Yeah.
So did Brendan Rodgers try to kind of go over his head at one point? Am I right in saying?
He's never been a popular guy at the club. I mean, he started from the very bottom, John Rudkin, at the football club years and years ago, and somehow he's just had promotion after promotion, and he is where he is now. I think the thing which, and not a lot of Leicester fans know this, it has been out there. There's been a few articles written about it. Apparently, Leicester's recruitment team, which has been known to be so efficient over the last 10 years, really. When you look back at 10 years ago, you look at Riyad Mahrez coming in, Anthony Knockaert from the Championship,
Vardy from Fleetwood.
Yeah, exactly. And then obviously more recently, you look at obviously your Kantes, and then your Maguire, and your Tillemans, Maddison, Ricardo Pereira. So that recruitment team has been solid. And yeah, Rodgers apparently in the last 18 months started to kind of ignore them a little bit, neglect them, and start going for his own type of signings. And that's where we've seen, obviously Vestergaard, Patson Daka, which, didn't sound like a bad signing at the time, I suppose, and Sumari as well. But yeah,
but it's that summer really where it started. As soon as you won the FA Cup, it was almost like everything went downhill for you. A bit like when Leeds finished in the top half in the first season back. It's just all gone downhill from that kind of point. And listen, Brendan Rodgers is, even for a neutral looking at it, he probably did stay too long. They probably should have made the call before the World Cup. And it's not that I don't think Brendan Rodgers is a good manager. I just think after a while, managers have cycles, and certain managers, you look at Brendan Rodgers, he's very much kind of a short-term kind of manager. First 1 or 2 seasons, look at every club he's been at, he has done really, really well. Leicester, he did really, really well first 2.5 years, really. We look at where Leicester were under club, who else was it? Bottom half, even under a little bit possible relegation trouble at some points as well. And he's obviously took you up to kind of back-to-back fifth place finishes and an FA Cup win. So, ultimately he did do really well, but it's not a massive surprise what happened there at Leicester. And I think it's ultimately a case of not refreshing the squad enough. Some players getting a little bit too comfortable, and then if they don't get the big moves, maybe their level's just dropping off a little bit. Tillemans, I'd say, is one example of that. I'd say from a neutral looking at it, I think his level's dropped off a little. Still a very good player, but level has dropped off a little bit. Maddison, to his credit, to be fair, I think still a superb footballer, and by far the best footballer of all the teams that are down in this relegation battle. And I still think he could be the player that keeps Leicester up. If Leicester are to stay up on Sunday, it will be because of him producing a mountain of magic.
Yeah, I mean, just really quickly before we move on to the fixtures this Sunday, I've been watching a documentary on, I think it's Paramount, about the origins of the Premier League. I don't know if you've seen it, and there was an episode on Leeds. And I believe my history on Leeds isn't great, mate. So please fill in the gaps here. But obviously, those years where when you were flitting around the Champions League, was it the last year where you finished 5th, and then after that it all seemed to crumble? And
so
it feels similar. There was parallels, because when obviously we finished 5th, and I know there was financial issues as well, Leeds, but we finished 5th, and then we finished 5th again, and it was like when that happened, when we finished 5th the second time, and it was another bottle in the league, albeit winning the FA Cup, but we bottled it again. I did at the time get a sense of feeling like maybe are these players thinking now, well, if we're not doing it now, we're never going to do it. Since then, it's just seemed to all go downhill, and the mentality in the players seems to have changed. I mean, just obviously from your experience as well with Leeds, I mean, what happened there? Are there any similarities at all?
Yeah, lots of similarities. I think in terms of the managers at the time, very similar characters. David O'Leary, Brendan Rodgers, where, at first, the first couple of years, you look at it, enthusiastic Irishmen, basically, in terms of like young managers, attacking style of football, really real crowd pleasers. The neutrals kind of really admire what they're trying to do, but I think as soon as it came about rebuilding the squad and obviously those near misses, Leeds, we did make the Champions League each season. That was the first time we missed out in 2002. Yeah, 2002. We were well on course to make it, and then we just completely fell away second bit of the season. There's a few other things as well. David O'Leary released a book which is basically criticising 1 or 2 players. It didn't go down particularly well, and it kind of dropped off after that as well. So there's a few other bits and pieces with that Leeds situation. Obviously financially as well. It really, started to kick in around that point. When we missed the Champions League, we gambled quite a lot of money on making the Champions League, didn't have that money coming in, and all of a sudden you're dropping down to the UEFA Cup, which it was at the time, Europa League now. It was a completely different ball game, and ultimately it didn't really justify the outlay that we put out. And it was one of them. Yeah, first 3 seasons absolutely fantastic. Ultimately, we did near miss. We didn't actually win anything, unlike Leicester. And then it was pretty sudden from there. Really, I think obviously we sacked David O'Leary, Terry Venables came in, and then we ultimately were straight away in the relegation battle the next season. And even worse than what Leicester were last season. It is quite similar. And then the season after, we went down, which is what potentially could happen to Leicester on Sunday. Who knows? But it was like that, really. We went from 5th to bottom 3 in 2 years. And possibly quite easily could have gone down a year after, really. Sorry, a year before we actually went down. Had we not sort of produced pretty much a great escape, really, the last couple of games of that season. So, and obviously there's the fish tank situation as well. I mean, just
what's that about?
Wasted.
What's that?
Peter Ridsdale's fish tank and that lot. I don't know how much that cost us, the fish tank. Honestly, I think they were more expensive than some of our subs, to be honest, some of the fish in that tank. But honestly, and then the directors just splurging money, private trips here and there, just spending chaotic amounts of money. And at the time, it wasn't really something that was particularly well heard of. In terms of, obviously, we've seen Barcelona in recent years go into almost financial ruin. Juventus, a similar situation. Other clubs around, top clubs around Europe, and this was the first time really you saw a top club at the time go into financial ruin. So it is a different situation. Obviously, Leicester, there's an element of obviously tragedy with it. Obviously, with your former owner as well. It's a lot. I do have to say, from certainly a neutral looking at it, I might be totally out of line here, but it's a lot of pressure on the son, isn't it? Really, it's a lot. They are big steps. They are big shoes to fill in terms of what your former owner did for the football club. So I do have to say that as well. Obviously, King Power, I think themselves have had a little bit of financial trouble during COVID. Hit their business model quite bad. The duty free, obviously. I'd imagine that's linked to a lack of travel at the time, stuff like that, maybe. So obviously COVID's hit you guys pretty hard. There's elements of that as well. And obviously you have to give the Sun credit, the fact that he did appoint Brendan Rodgers in the first place, and it did actually give you that initial jump up the league. But ultimately, where maybe the father would have had a little bit more knowledge would have been like when he was a little bit ruthless and sacked Claudio Ranieri. He probably would have pulled the plug on Brendan Rodgers, I think, last summer, to be honest. I think he would have been a lot more ruthless. But you don't know. But I do think there's a lot of unfortunate situations there for Leicester, where obviously the training ground, amazing complex, and it just ultimately, it could be a championship complex potentially. But it's quite, listen, in the way, the way Leicester have built is really, really admirable, in the last sort of 6 or 7 years, and the impact they've had in the Premier League. But it just shows how quickly things can go wrong. We're talking about teams like Brighton, Brentford at this moment in time. They lose 1 or 2 players and have one bad summer of poor recruitment, or lose to Zerbi, etc., etc. They could quite easily go into that situation. I'm not saying they're going to, but I'm saying it could quite easily happen. Southampton as well, actually, by the way, who have also gone down. Southampton were one of the best run clubs in the country, 4 or 5 years ago. It can go wrong very, very quickly. And there's a lesson to all. Leeds 2 years ago, honestly, if you told me this was going to happen 2 years ago, I wouldn't have believed you at all. No chance, because Leeds were so well run. We signed people like Rafinha, Marcelo Bielsa, playing fantastic football, finishing 9th. I think one of the form teams at the back end of the season. And it just shows you how easily one poorly managed summer, one poor bit of recruitment, one poor judgment call, and things can just snowball from there. And that's what's happened to Leeds. That's what's happened to Leicester, really.
Yeah, spot on, mate. We're going to move on now, because I know that you've got to jump off soon. I'm calling it. I'm surprised Sky Sports haven't called it this already. I think they have in the past. Judgment Day or Judgment Day Sunday, whatever. Look, mate, I mean, this has been one of the most, I would say, intense relegation battles in a long time. I think just because of how many teams were down there for so long and how bad everyone's been. We've all been terrible. In previous years, a couple teams would be cut adrift by now. So we'll go straight in, because in my opinion, and you might agree, Leeds are in the worst situation of all 3 of the clubs. And the reason for that obviously is, I think Leicester need to win and Everton need to draw or lose. And Leeds need to win, but also hope Everton and Leicester both lose. I think that's right. So it's tough for you, mate. I mean, how are you see what are your thoughts going into the game, and how do you see it going between you and Spurs?
I can honestly see all three teams winning on the last day. And it sounds mad because how bad we've all been this season. I can see us all winning. I can see us all losing. I think Spurs is an interesting one because obviously Spurs, I think, have still got European football on the table, albeit the Conference League. It depends how much they want that, really. Is there an element with Spurs where they're thinking, ooh, if we play the long game here, let Villa go into the Conference League rather than ourselves. We save ourselves a load of games for a competition we don't really care about anyway. It won't surprise me if Spurs maybe go a little bit weaker. Ultimately, it doesn't really matter. I think it's going to be a difficult game for us either way. They're still going to play people like Harry Kane on the pitch. And it's all about us stopping Harry Kane. I think that's how you stop them, really. But I can see it being a pretty awful game of football, to be honest. I can see it being really cagey. Neither teams are particularly playing well. I think both teams just want the season to end. And they're just hoping if we can get that. We need to start well. We have to start well on Sunday. We have to get an early goal, put a little bit of pressure at the KP Stadium and Goodison. Leeds get an early goal. If we don't score early, I really do worry for us. I really do worry for us. We've got to put that early bit of pressure on both teams. We've seen it. We've experienced this last year, against Burnley. Where we went to Brentford away. Albeit we're in a much better situation than what we are now. We were level on points. There was only two teams in the fight. Burnley had Newcastle at home, and they always had a bit of confidence in Newcastle doing us a favour there. I'm trying to think which way round it was. We had a goal disallowed pretty early on. It took a while on the VAR calls. It took about 2.5 minutes. Good 2.5 minutes, possibly longer than that. Very tight offside call. 0-0 at the time. 1-0 leads at that point. And it filtered through to Burnley. And then a minute later, as the VAR call's getting done, the whole ground, well, not the whole ground, obviously, because Brentford wanted us to go down badly that day. The whole Leeds end, everyone's going up and I'm thinking, what's going on? What's going on? And it clocks. Newcastle scores. Our goal actually got disallowed, but everyone was buzzing that much. And obviously it filtered through to Burnley, the fact that we'd scored, got disallowed. It does have people say, in terms of the players are professional, they just focus on their own jobs. But for me, it does play a part. Certainly for the teams in front, Everton, Leicester are both in front of us. The pressure isn't really on us too much at Leeds because I think most of the fan base, we need a miracle, not only in our own performance, in the fact that we need both teams to drop points, and I just don't really see that happening. But yeah, we have to score early to put pressure on the other teams. I think it's a game we can win. Is it a game I think we will win? I'll go 2-1 Leeds, but there's really not much conviction behind that at all. I just have a little bit of belief that someone like Rodrigo is really going to be up for the game. A couple of gaps in that Tottenham back line you might be able to exploit. Fraser Forster in goal might get some situations there where he might throw one into the back of his own net. Who knows? But it's not a lot of conviction behind that. I think we might just about win it.
Yeah, I mean, I thought the same, to be honest with you. I think Leeds will nick it because I just think Spurs are terrible. Nothing really to play for, and I just got a feeling, mate. I think you'll get the win, but let's see if it matters. We'll quickly now get through the last two fixtures. So, Leicester versus West Ham. I mean, like you said, obviously the pressure is on Leicester and Everton, rather than Leeds. Leicester have to win. West Ham have a cup final. I know it's still quite a way away. I think 10 days or so after the game. But what do you think, mate? Personally, I'm going for a 2-1 Leicester City win. Doing our job, what we have to do. But what do you think?
Yeah, I think Leicester win that game, to be honest. I do think Leicester win the game. I think, as you say about the Conference League game for West Ham. West Ham are going to be pretty heavily focused on that. So I'm not so much saying that Declan Rice will get dropped, but I think Declan Rice might come off early in that game, or Jared Bowen might come off early. I can see it being quite a nasty, horrible game of football. Just think someone like James Maddison or Vardy. Certainly of Vardy, it's quite written in the stars there. Jamie Vardy to get that decisive goal. I just think Leicester ultimately, when the pressure's been on in the past, Leicester have always delivered. Really, they have always found that way. That result at Newcastle kind of sums it up for me. Yes, it was slightly fortuitous, the fact Newcastle missed a couple of chances, but it's ultimately Leicester still find a way to get those results. A little point here and there, 3 points here and there as well. but I think you'll win that game. I don't think it'll be a thrilling game of football to watch. It might be on a set piece, like Sutar on a set piece or something like that. But I'll go 1-0 Leicester.
Okay, and I know you've got to shoot, so give me one final very quick score prediction. Everton against Bournemouth. How do you think that's finishing?
Oh,
because this decides it all.
I know it's not going to go down well, this, but my problem is I just think Bournemouth in that crowd with nothing to play for, I think might just suffer a little bit. The fact that that's going to be I think all three grounds are going to be pretty raucous, but I just think obviously we all have our, whatever we do, Leeds and Leicester, it's down to what Bournemouth do. It's at the end of the day as well. As much as we don't like it, that is the case. But I just have a bad feeling about Bournemouth in that crowd. I just have a really bad feeling about them. Albeit, the other way of looking at it as well is Everton might get a few nerves, not being as good at home this year as what they were in the run-in last season. We've already seen them drop points against Fulham, who had nothing to play for. So, who knows? But 2-1 Everton. I'm sorry. I'm really sorry.
That's all right, mate. I mean, according to you, so you've got Leeds 19th.
All three teams winning. That's just not going to happen, is it?
Yeah, well, you never know. That would be Leeds 19th, Leicester 18th, and then Everton safe in 17th. But we'll find out. We'll find out soon enough. Only a couple more days, mate. Thanks for coming on. It's much appreciated. If your prediction comes true, then we will be seeing more of you next season because we'll both be in the Championship.
That's the League One days, mate. That's the League One days.
But just before you go, mate, I mean, the link's in the description for All Leeds TV. But what have you got going on this weekend, just so people can check it out if they want to?
Well, I'm just about to film the preview for the Tottenham game on Sunday, so that'll be going out pretty soon. Hopefully either tonight or tomorrow morning. We'll then obviously be doing content around the game itself, probably a bit of a post-match reaction. I mean, to be honest with you, after that West Ham game, that effectively felt like the dress rehearsal to the inevitable, really. I think if we do somehow stay up, it's probably the survival of all survivals, to be honest, on the final day. I mean, it probably is the great escape you can probably think of, and certainly in the form we're in. But yeah, so there will be a reaction, win, lose or draw on it, probably more of a ranty kind of reaction, but it is what it is. And then a bit of a reaction about the season, probably the day after or so, and then we'll be on to the Championship content, 46 game seasons.
Yeah, perfect, mate. Top man. Thanks again for coming on. Like I said, links in the description for All Leeds TV, and I'll catch you soon, Oscar, mate. Cheers for coming on.
No worries at all, mate.
See you in a bit. Bye.
See you in a bit, mate.
Thanks to Oscar for jumping on. Like I said, links in the description, so check out All Leeds TV. I've been on there loads of times. I think maybe Reedy's been on or Tom's been on before as well. But, check them out, especially because if we do both end up in the Championship next year, then you're going to want to check out that content, of course. Let's go back to some of the comments now. Now it's just me and you. So let's have a look here. So obviously Leicester versus West Ham. Let's go back to this. So, yeah, look, we're going to have a bit more content before the season finishes. Obviously we'll have Jamie's show on Sunday morning, which will be the aftermath show, but actually a preview show, I suppose. Personally, I think 2-1 Leicester win. Like I said, get your score predictions in. So Scott's here. Scott says 1-1. That's not going to be enough to stay in the division, unfortunately. Terrence says Vardy one last dance. Well, it's hard to get excited for these things because even if we do win and even if Vardy does score and all of this, we still have to rely on Everton and Bournemouth, don't we? Scott says, I think Dino's realised Suter is important now and Didi potentially injured, so hope Mendy starts. Yeah, Suter's not had barely any minutes since Smith's been in the dugout. So, obviously it worked coming in at Newcastle. The height, a lot of headers out of the box. So it did work. So it'll be interesting to see if he does start. Mendy, I mean, that's a discussion for another day, how he hasn't played anything. Andy says, simple thing is we can't lose. We can't rely on other teams. And Terrence says, Reedy, our boss never seen him Monday night. So yeah, thanks again for everyone viewing. Obviously, thanks to Oscar for coming on. Much appreciated. Like I said, this isn't the end of the content this weekend. We've got plenty more to come. So obviously, stay tuned and yeah, Thanks everyone for coming on.
Thanks for watching Leicester Fan TV. Thanks to our sponsors, ADT Taxis, Everards, Pukka Pies, Pink Car Leasing, Leicester Riders, Hollogram, The Fox's Arms, Peter's Pizzeria, Hope Against Cancer, and Newby Co estate agents. Make sure to follow us on all of our social channels at Leicester Fan TV. Visit our website, leicesterfantv.com.